Hi there. I'm gonna do a review for X3, or usually known as X-Men: The Last Stand. This movie came out in 2006. Um, this movie more or less same concept as the other two movies. Directed by Brett Ratner and starring largely the same cast as the first two movies of X-Men. This is where the problem started to really show up in the X-Men franchise, though, um, because more or less, you got all the same hatchback of characters. Patrick Stewart plays Professor Xavier. Hugh Jackman plays Wolverine. Halle Berry plays Storm. But um, and of course, I mean, Ian McKellen plays Eric Lensher. This movie changes things up a little bit from the first two movies. This is where you can see the problems starting to develop with the X-Men franchise fairly early on in the franchise's history, as opposed to the problems that later developed in the franchise. Um, Again, this franchise isn't that bad for its time. It's slowly but surely teetered into silliness of how do you um, how do you deal with this? This movie is more or less about how the government has developed a vaccination, so-called vaccination for mutation, and the question becomes: are they going to forcibly try and clear out all the mutants, or is it going to be a very voluntary thing? Now, this is not entirely clear what they're planning to do. In fact, it's not entirely. I don't know. This movie has some problems with, though, because this movie has three or four subplots in it, and that's really where the problem starts. This movie has the same problem that Spider-Man 3 had, where it has a bunch of subplots. You got a main plot about mutation, about getting rid of mutation. Then you got a bunch of subplots. Cyclops suddenly decides, for whatever reason, that he's going to go off on his own. Don't know why. Don't know for what purpose. I guess he's really missing Jean Grey because in the second movie she essentially uh, dies to save the crew from an incident, and more or less they run into a problem where of course he goes off, and Jean Grey of course is turning into the Phoenix, which is supposed to be the Phoenix, not really the Phoenix. This is just the bird, the Firebird part of the concept. More or less, this is what you call a lot of problems because the movie has all kinds of weird subplotting going on. Jean Grey becomes the Phoenix, and of course, Eric Lensher, Magneto, brings her into his group because, of course, that's the only group she really can identify with. Professor X is a little bit too neat and tidy for her. This movie has a strong subplot where they also have an early scene where they show the where they show Professor X and Eric Lensher dealing with Jean Grey at a younger age. This is apparently before things went off the rails between him and Eric. Nonetheless, shown to be extremely powerful, Jean Grey is. But nonetheless, this movie's got too many subplots. That's basically what the problem is. There's too many things going on. There's one moment in the movie where they reveal there is a vaccine, and they're going to try and vaccinate the mutants. It seems like this is going to be a forceful thing. And when Magneto goes and attacks the truck convoy to get back, what was it, Storm or whatever, he ends up with a situation where Mystique gets vaccinated, and of course he has to leave her behind because she's no longer a mutant. Which shows you how much he cares about that stuff. He really does care. He's a real Puritan about the issue. But nonetheless, we get to. There's just too many. There's a lot of subplots. More or less, Jean Grey comes under the hood of Eric Lensher, and he has to sort of try to get her to do his bidding. And of course, in this movie, I believe it is the the prison island in San Francisco that's supposed to be a place for putting mutants in now. Instead of, I guess, it was deactivated as a prison, as a normal prison, and they turned it into a place to put mutants or something like that. It's not entirely clear what the problem is because some of this stuff should have been more brought up in other X-Men, the first two X-Men movies, and it really only got brought up in this one. There's suddenly a huge pile of mutants that they found. They're of course saying they're not gonna. Of course, they're all very concerned, and there's reason to be concerned. However, if you see all the mutants, you kind of wonder if you, if you don't want some of these people locked away for a good long time. It's just the way they present their mutation. They seem to like this is the problem I have with all these mutations is that it seems like it's a side effect of also being a possible psychopath. A psycho person, a crazy person that wants to kill everybody or wants to do some serious damage to the world. Not so much just a mutation where they can light things on fire or form ice out of their breath. That's where I think the problem starts is that this movie gets into some little detail about the fact that the military basically, I think in some ways the humans have some reason to believe, to fear these people because they basically are starting to go rogue on humanity. And of course, when they inevitably attack, Alcatraz, when they go to attack Alcatraz in San Francisco, um, they literally rip out the Golden Gate Bridge and they use it as a bastion to get over to Alcatraz. And of course, this is a problem. I think that's the reason why I think in a way that's the reason why the government does want to control mutation because they recognize a potential threat to themselves and to everybody else that the mutants aren't really a good chunk of mutants, 3/4 to 90% of mutants are not necessarily the people you want to have running around the world because they are actually dangerous and they could do things that are very volatile. They could end up being actual criminals. And that's where the problem starts in this movie is that they're finally answering that basic question. The first two movies didn't really get into that too much. They tried to keep it pretty tame, but next three they actually do indicate that a good chunk of the mutants are actually pretty deranged people. And of course, the decision to cut the mutation off is probably in a way a good effect because it gets rid of all these people's abilities to be criminals, to do bad things. But nonetheless, of course, the 10% are really the important ones. Of course, in this movie, they don't want a vaccine for mutation. This is also a movie where we get to this part of the subplotting problem is there's too many new mutants that are suddenly introduced in this movie. You've got the kid that's got the wings. I forget what his name is. There's just too many mutants in this movie. They have like a whole circus brand of them where they got like all kinds of things that shows up, and of course it causes problems. The big final battle finale is, of course, almost hilarious, bordering on silliness because you have all these mutants going to attack Alcatraz, and of course the U.S. U.S. force is there to deal with them, but of course they don't have. They're barely a match for the mutants because much of their equipment is based on the idea that that they won't be able to they can't use bigger equipment. They were talking about bringing in tanks, and of course somebody said, well, Magneto is going to make those paper. And I was like, technically the tanks aren't pure steel for most part. But they do have this problem where the forces are, the soldiers are trying to use equipment that will demutate the mutants. So it is a bit of a concern, but nonetheless, considering what actually happens in this movie, considering that Jean Grey does sort of turn into the Phoenix. They introduced it briefly at the end of X2. In this movie, it's kind of a very brief problem. Yeah, she's sort of becoming the Phoenix, but I mean, the Phoenix was much more complicated in the comics than this movie. This movie is kind of hilarious. The Phoenix is just so silly in these movies. They don't. The directors just do not know how to handle that concept. But nonetheless, a lot of critical characters get wiped out. Professor Xavier dies in this movie, and apparently, like even Jean Grey dies. Lots of people die. Of course, Wolverine doesn't die. His healing factor's magnified by an order of 10 at least, because at the ending of the movie, when he's dealing with Jean Grey, suddenly his healing factor is instantaneous rather than something that does take actual time to do, which was established in the first two X-Men movies. Now it's he just heals automatically. Nonetheless, this movie is a bit of a mixed response. I don't know if it would be a recommendation or not. I guess it depends on how much you like the first two movies, whether I think the third movie is worth watching. I'm not the biggest fan of this movie. It had too many characters and too many subplots in it. It had too much trouble with its notions. There's the one main plot is relatively decent, but there's too much subplotting. And how they introduce the Phoenix is sort of hilarious. Nonetheless, it's all right, I guess. It's watchable. It's getting to be kind of out of date, considering that I'm really hoping that when Marvel gets this franchise that they rejuvenate it and get it back to normal. I don't know what's going to happen with that. So far, they haven't really given a lot of plot details. But nonetheless, yes, they end up stopping the anti-mutation vaccine. It all works out sort of in the end. It's not too bad, but it's not a terrible movie. It's actually mediocre. It's not as good as I don't think it's as good as X2. I don't think it's as good as X-Men. But none of these movies are. All these first three original X-Men movies, none of them are really all that great. They all have their problems. They all have their inefficiencies. And nonetheless, yeah, it's watchable. It's got mutants in it. If you're really there to watch mutants conquer a prison, then I guess this is the movie for you. If you want a little bit more depth, this isn't really going to do it for you. None of them really did that for people, but no, this is okay.